Cruella is out in theaters and on Disney Plus, the new prequel film about the origins of the classic Disney villain, Cruella de Vil, from the 101 Dalmatians movies, animated and live action, who, a reminder, was a fashion designer lady who wanted to capture all these Dalmatians, skin them, and make a coat out of them. So as far as villains go, pretty despicable. This movie was directed by Craig Gillespie, who previously made, amongst other films, Lars and the Real Girl and I, Tonya. And it stars Emma Stone, Emma Thompson, Joel Fry, Paul Walter Hauser, and Mark Strong. Now, when it was first announced, my initial reaction was, really? Is it so difficult to come up with an original story that we have to do villain origins now? But then the trailer came out, and I have to say it looked fairly interesting, and having now seen the movie, I think it's way better than it had any right to be, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. The story opens with the young girl Estella being born and raised by a single mother. From an early age, she's kind of a troublemaker and a rebel, and her mom tries to kind of put that under control by inventing this other version of Estella called Cruella, and she essentially tells the girl that all the bad parts of her are Cruella, and to keep her locked away in her heart, essentially. Soon after, the mother dies tragically, and Estella arrives in London as an orphan. She joins up with two other homeless kids and begins her life as this street thief. 10 years later, as a birthday gift, one of her friends forges an accepted application job for her at a famous fashion house, because Estella is really talented at sewing and making clothes and disguises for them. So she begins working there, and by a twist of fate, she catches the eye of the Baroness, played by Emma Thompson, who is this cold, ruthless boss lady, the biggest figure in the fashion world, and she begins working for her, all the while learning more and more about her past, her mother's past, the events that led her to her death, and the Baroness's connection to all of that, which will eventually lead to bringing back the Cruella persona. So the movie borrows from other films quite heavily. I'd say it's about 70% Devil Wears Prada, with the fashion world and that dynamic between a naive but talented novice and this ruthless boss. 20% Joker, with a villain backstory showing their tragic life and slow descent into evil, and 10% Ocean's 11, with elements of heist movies involving the thieving friends of Cruella and elaborate set pieces. And I'll put it like this. Such a mix of quite different films is always fairly risky, and I think just based on the script alone, Cruella was also tricky to execute. Like, the story elements, they fit in almost too nicely with each other, and there are things which are too on the nose within it. But what elevates that script are the two lead performances. Both Emmas are clearly having a blast in their roles. I mean, arguably, they're both playing villains in this film. Even if Cruella is made to be a protagonist, you can call her an anti-villain, to be precise, pretty easily. And these are not just any villains, they both are dialed up to 11 and get to chew a lot of scenery. So it must have been enormously fun for both actresses. Crucially though, that fun that they were having visibly also translates to the fun that I was having as an audience member. I believed their characters. I enjoyed seeing them on screen. I think they're both played very well. And not just in a vacuum, each one of them separately, because the best part is how they play off of each other. The dynamic between the student and master, and how slowly that turns into a rivalry and then even a revenge story. So I think that all the interactions between the two ladies are just splendid and basically carry the film on its own. Well, almost on its own, because there's another really strong element to it, which is the production design. The sets, the lighting, the color palette, the hairstyles, and especially costumes. I mean, it's a movie centered around fashion, so it must have just been a wet dream for the costume designer to work on it, because it features a lot of stunning dresses, a lot of Cruella's wild glam rock costumes, a lot of business lady outfits for the Baroness, and even outside of all of that, the story takes place in the 1960s London, which means a ton of period accurate clothing for all the other people that populate the film. And as little as I know about clothes, I really loved this aspect of the film. It's just pleasant to admire all these wonderful costumes in action, and it's certainly one of the key elements that make the film so lively, so full of energy. I also want to talk about the soundtrack, which on paper is exactly my jam because it features a lot of classic rock music. Rolling Stones, The Doors, The Beatles, The Zombies, the list just goes on and on. But there is a slight problem with it, where I felt that it was overused. There are times in the film where one song hasn't really even ended yet, and already another is blaring through the speakers, and some of them fit the scenes really well, but some of them are very on the nose in terms of how, the lyrics are basically just hammering home the point that the scene was already making on its own. The most outrageous example is probably using Sympathy for the Devil again for one of the final scenes, which, I mean, it's been done dozens of times in movies. We show an evil character, oh, we play a song about the devil. How about that? Wink wink. It's very on the nose, it's very unsubtle, and so I think the soundtrack, as amazing as it is on paper, is kind of hit and miss when it comes to its actual usage and execution. There are some other slight problems as well. I mentioned that the story is almost too tight for it to be believable. I also think it has that problem where it sets a very clear trajectory for Cruella to becoming the Cruella we know. I mean, even in the first 15 minutes of the film, there's an inclusion of Dalmatians in a context which immediately makes you go, ah, so that's why she hates them so much. And Cruella becomes more evil, more evil, more evil until she kind of reverses course and ends up being just an edgy, misunderstood girl who still has a big heart and uses the power of friendship to win. I mean, I get why Disney would do it. It would take balls to make us sympathize with someone who really does become despicable at the end. And ballsy is something that Disney as a studio does very, very rarely. But in any case, it is just weird the way it's handled. And as a final point, I do think that the movie is slightly too long. It runs for 2 hours, 14 minutes, and I fully believe that those 14 minutes could have been trimmed for better pacing, especially as the film has this 5-act structure, which makes it slightly drag around the middle parts. But I have to say, even with those criticisms, I did have a lot of fun watching it, and I would certainly recommend it to other people as well. It was a fun movie. It makes up for a lot of its faults with great production design, including costumes, energetic atmosphere, and especially fantastic performances from the two leading ladies. Good stuff.